Imagine being a soldier stationed in the dense, mist-laden jungles of Vietnam, where shadows and voices from beyond seem to linger at every turn. Or picture standing on the blood-soaked grounds of Gettysburg, where over 50,000 souls were lost. Yet some say they never truly left. Welcome to a journey into the most haunted battlefields in history, places where war didn't just claim lives, it left behind spirits that seem bound to the land, whispering warnings and showing eerie apparitions to anyone who dares to visit. From the ominous ghost soldiers at Firebase Ripcord to the eerie cries echoing through Fort Mifflin's walls and the tragic souls wandering the Gettysburg fields, join us as we explore the chilling tales of America's most haunted wartime sites. Stay tuned. This is a story of battles, not only fought on land, but between life and death itself. Story 1. Firebase Ripcord, the haunted hill of lost souls. In the dense, mist-covered jungles of Vietnam lies a ghost story of war, sorrow, and the mysterious realm beyond life. Firebase Ripcord, a small, rugged outpost in the A Shao Valley, was initially a strategic post for American forces, meant to monitor and disrupt North Vietnamese Army, NVA, supply lines. But Firebase Ripcord became infamous for something beyond bloodshed and artillery. It is known as one of the most haunted military sites from the Vietnam War, a place where the spirits of fallen soldiers linger, restless and bound to the land they died defending. The year was 1970, and the Vietnam War was raging with no end in sight. Firebase Ripcord was perched high on a ridge, surrounded by dense jungle and rolling mist. Soldiers stationed there felt an eerie isolation. The jungle was thick and unforgiving, the air heavy with moisture and the constant buzz of unseen insects. While combat was an accepted danger, the men began to sense something else in the hills. Many of them felt a presence in the jungle around Firebase Ripcord, a feeling as heavy as the thick fog that often blanketed the base at dusk. In those early months, strange reports began circulating among the troops. Some soldiers dismissed these experiences as effects of the grueling conditions, fatigue, and fear. But as the weeks passed, the unexplainable events increased in frequency and intensity. Private James Collins, a 19-year-old from Ohio, was one of the first to have a direct encounter. While on night watch, Collins swept his flashlight over the tree line, his heart pounding at the thought of enemy scouts lurking nearby. Suddenly, he spotted a figure just beyond the perimeter, a young man in a blood-stained uniform staring back at him. The figure looked familiar, and Collins felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized the face. It was his friend, Private Andrews, who had died in a mortar attack only a week earlier. Collins could only watch, frozen in terror, as the ghostly figure faded into the mist. Collins wasn't the only one to see strange figures. Other soldiers soon began reporting sightings of shadowy apparitions in tattered uniforms, drifting through the base as if trapped in a silent march. Some soldiers dismissed these stories as hallucinations brought on by stress and exhaustion. But as the sightings became more frequent, a new nickname emerged among the men: the Ghosts of Ripcord. The haunting at Firebase Ripcord was not limited to sightings. By nightfall, the base would grow quiet, the sounds of the jungle replacing the daytime chatter of soldiers. It was in this silence that soldiers began to hear voices. It started as faint murmurs, whispers that could be dismissed as the wind moving through the trees. But as the nights wore on, the voices became clearer. Soldiers reported hearing their own names called out from the darkness, spoken in perfect American accents. Some believed it was the enemy, trying to play tricks on their minds. But the voices were too close, too personal, to be the work of NVA soldiers. Many soldiers recognized the voices as those of their fallen comrades, men who had died in previous battles. Private Thompson, who had lost his best friend in an ambush a month prior, swore he heard his friend calling his name one night. The the voice soft but unmistakable, carrying through the mist that hung thick around the base. He remembered how his friend's voice had sounded, calm and steady, despite the horrors they'd both witnessed, but hearing it again, coming from the darkness, filled him with a dread he couldn't shake. On particularly humid nights, the mist would roll in, shrouding the base in an ethereal glow. The voices seemed to grow louder in these conditions, more insistent. Soldiers reported hearing their names repeated, along with whispers warning them to leave the valley. Some even heard sounds of battles long past, distant gunfire, explosions, and the anguished cries of the wounded. These auditory hauntings made many men feel as though they were caught in a timeless battlefield, where the dead continued to fight, forever reliving their last moments. As the psychological toll mounted, more soldiers began to share their encounters. By spring 1970, it wasn't just individual apparitions that haunted the base. Entire groups of ghostly soldiers were reported moving silently through the jungle surrounding Firebase Ripcord. Lieutenant Michael Harrington, a seasoned officer, recalled a particularly unsettling encounter. While leading a patrol near the edge of the base, he saw what looked like a line of soldiers marching through the mist. At first, he thought it was another patrol unit, but as he drew closer, he realized that these soldiers were moving in complete silence, their uniforms faded and torn, their faces expressionless and pale. As Harrington and his men watched in stunned silence, the figures continued to march, oblivious to their presence. Some wore American uniforms, others wore the uniforms of the NVA. They moved together, side by side, as if bound to the valley by the violence they had endured. The eerie procession continued until the figures faded into the fog, leaving Harrington and his men shaken and unsure of what they had just witnessed. Back at the base, Harrington relayed the story to his fellow soldiers, who listened in silence. They too had seen things they couldn't explain. Silent soldiers, faces frozen in death, staring back at them from the mist. As the siege on Firebase Ripcord loomed, the strange occurrences grew more intense. Soldiers felt as if they were being watched, not by the enemy, but by unseen forces lurking just beyond the camp. Desperation and fear began to grip the men, especially at night when the voices and apparitions seemed most active. In late June, only days before the NVA's final assault, Lieutenant Harrington had a personal encounter that left him deeply shaken. During a heavy firefight, he spotted the ghostly figure of Private Roberts, a soldier who had died days before in a mortar attack. Roberts' face was pale and his eyes vacant, staring through the chaos of battle with an expression that Harrington could only describe as sorrowful. The apparition mouthed something, and though Harrington couldn't hear over the gunfire, he knew what Roberts was saying. "Leave this place." Harrington felt a chill run through him as Roberts vanished, leaving him to face the enemy and the unsettling feeling that the dead were trying to communicate a warning that the valley was cursed, a place where life and death blurred together in endless suffering. On July 1st, 1970, the NVA launched their assault on Firebase Ripcord, initiating a 23-day siege that would become one of the bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War. The American forces were bombarded with relentless artillery fire, and every day brought new casualties. The men fought bravely, but they were outnumbered, isolated, and exhausted. Amidst the violence, some soldiers claimed they saw ghostly figures mingling with the enemy soldiers, phantoms that moved through the carnage, unaffected by bullets or explosions. For many soldiers, the apparitions were an ever-present reminder of their own mortality. They felt as if the dead were watching them, silently observing the living as they fought to survive another day. The fear of death became palpable, not just from the enemy, but from the unseen forces that seemed to haunt Firebase Ripcord. As the siege dragged on, the line between life and death grew thin. Men reported seeing the faces of their dead comrades in the shadows, their expressions filled with sorrow and warning. The apparitions seemed drawn to the carnage, their presence a haunting reminder of the countless lives lost to the horrors of war. By late July, the siege ended, but at a tremendous cost. More than 250 American soldiers lost their lives, and the base was ultimately abandoned, left to the jungle and the ghosts that haunted it. Survivors returned home with physical and emotional scars, forever haunted by the events they had witnessed. Not just the horrors of battle, but the inexplicable encounters that defied all logic. Many of the men who had served at Firebase Ripcord were plagued by recurring nightmares. They saw the faces of their fallen comrades, heard their voices calling out from the misty jungles of Vietnam, and felt an unshakable presence watching them, even as they tried to return to normal life. Some sought help, but others kept their experiences to themselves, haunted by memories they couldn't explain. Firebase Ripcord remains a haunting symbol of the Vietnam War, a place where the boundary between life and death is blurred, and where the souls of those who perished continue to wander. The site itself is now reclaimed by the jungle, but stories persist of travelers who hear whispers in the wind and see shadowy figures moving through the mist, dressed in the uniforms of a forgotten war. Firebase Ripcord stands as a grim reminder of the unknown and the unknowable. It is a place where the spirits of the fallen seem bound to the land, their voices echoing through the mist, their faces lingering in the shadows. For those who survived, Firebase Ripcord is not just a memory. It is a nightmare, a place where the horrors of war continue to live on, haunting both the dead and the living. The tale of Firebase Ripcord is a testament to the brutal reality of war and the lasting impact it has on those who experience it. It is a story of sacrifice, loss, and the enduring mystery of what lies beyond. Whether the ghosts were real or merely figments of fear and exhaustion, the legend of Firebase Ripcord will forever remain a haunting chapter in the history of the Vietnam War. A place where the souls of the lost still roam, waiting and watching in the misty hills of the A Shao Valley. Story 2. The Hauntings of Fort Mifflin. Nestled on the banks of the Delaware River, Fort Mifflin stands as a reminder of history steeped in valor and tragedy. It's an eerie structure, its stone walls weathered by time and its hallways cloaked in an unsettling quiet. Built in 1771, this fort near Philadelphia bore witness to some of the fiercest battles of the Revolutionary War, and later served as a prison during the Civil War. Through these blood-stained chapters, Fort Mifflin has gained a reputation as one of the most haunted military sites in America, where the echoes of the past still linger and the restless spirits refuse to leave. In 1777, the Revolutionary War raged across the American colonies. Fort Mifflin, a stronghold of the Continental Army, stood as a bastion against the British forces advancing along the Delaware River. This small garrison of soldiers was tasked with holding off the British Navy to protect General Washington's forces in nearby Philadelphia. Though their resources were meager, their resolve was unbreakable. For weeks, the British bombarded the fort, unleashing cannonballs that shattered walls and tore through soldiers. The defenders fought valiantly, refusing to abandon their post despite being outgunned and outmanned. Amid the smoke and chaos, a young soldier named Thomas Thatcher huddled in a corner, writing a letter to his mother back in Virginia. His words were filled with hope, determination, and a longing for peace. Yet, like many soldiers there, Thomas never saw his family again. The siege claimed his life, along with the lives of over 250 other American patriots. Their bodies were buried in shallow graves within the fort's grounds. Today, visitors report feeling an intense sadness and a heavy silence near the fort's ruined walls, as if the souls of those fallen soldiers remain trapped. Some have even seen ghostly figures wandering the grounds, their uniforms tattered, their faces bearing expressions of pain and loss. The specters of Fort Mifflin's revolutionary defenders seem to be bound eternally to the place where they made the ultimate sacrifice. After the Revolutionary War, Fort Mifflin was rebuilt and took on a new, darker role during the Civil War. It was transformed into a prison, a place of despair for both Confederate soldiers and Union deserters. Here, in cramped cells devoid of light and filled with the stench of death, prisoners awaited their fate: execution, disease, or starvation. One such prisoner was William Howe, a Union soldier convicted of desertion. Howe was locked away in a small stone cell known as Casemate 11, where he spent his final days in complete isolation, awaiting execution. The cell was damp and suffocating, with only a tiny window barred with iron, through which he glimpsed the outside world for the last time. Visitors to Casemate 11 today describe an overwhelming sense of dread and sorrow. Many claim they've seen Howe's forlorn spirit sitting on the cold stone floor, his gaze distant and filled with regret. Others have heard the heavy footsteps of someone pacing the small cell, a habit that prisoners like Howe might have adopted to stave off the crushing loneliness. Paranormal investigators often capture unexplained noises in Casemate 11, whispers, groans, and sometimes a heart-wrenching sob that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. Those who dare to spend time alone in the cell report feeling an icy touch on their shoulders or hearing the faint murmurs of someone pleading for forgiveness. Among Fort Mifflin's most chilling tales is the legend of the Screaming Woman, believed to be the spirit of Elizabeth Pratt. Elizabeth was the wife of an officer stationed at the fort during the 18th century. She was a gentlewoman, known for her kindness, but her life took a tragic turn when her young daughter died from a sudden illness. Grief consumed Elizabeth, and in her despair she took her own life within the fort's walls. To this day, visitors claim to hear Elizabeth's anguished screams echoing through the corridors. The cries are so loud and chilling that residents nearby have sometimes called the police, believing someone is in distress. Yet, when authorities arrive, they find nothing but an empty, silent fortress. People who have heard her describe the sound as a heartbreaking, piercing wail that cuts through the night, sending chills down their spines. On quiet evenings, some visitors see a woman in old-fashioned clothing drifting through the shadows, her face pale, her eyes brimming with sadness. Those who catch a glimpse of her say that her sorrow is almost tangible, as if her very presence is a manifestation of her despair. In 1980, a team of U.S. Army engineers visited Fort Mifflin to inspect its structure. As they walked along the parapet, one of the soldiers saw a figure standing at a distance, a man dressed in a Revolutionary War uniform, his face partially obscured by the setting sun. The soldier called out, assuming the figure was a historical reenactor, but the man didn't respond. Instead, he simply stood there, gazing at the river with a distant, almost haunted expression. Moments later, the figure vanished. The soldier, shaken, described the man's empty stare, saying it was as if he were looking through him, not at him. Later, he learned that he was not the first to see the phantom soldier on the parapet. Many have reported similar sightings of a silent figure dressed in tattered revolutionary garb, standing guard over the fort, eternally vigilant. Casemate 11, where William Howe met his fate, is known as the most active site of paranormal phenomena in Fort Mifflin. The dark, claustrophobic chamber seems to trap not only air, but also the spirits of those who suffered there. Paranormal investigators often come equipped with cameras, recording devices, and temperature gauges to capture evidence of the supernatural activity within. Countless visitors have reported feeling a heavy presence in the room, an inexplicable weight pressing down on them as soon as they enter. Some have seen shadowy figures moving in the dim light, while others have felt a sudden, bone-chilling cold pass through them. A few brave souls who spent the night in Casemate 11 have claimed to hear whispered voices, sometimes crying, sometimes praying, and occasionally a voice pleading, "Let me out." In one recording, a distinct voice was captured saying, "I didn't mean to run." The investigators believe it may have been Howe, his spirit trapped in an endless loop of regret, forever haunted by his final days of confinement. While many of Fort Mifflin's paranormal encounters occur at night, the supernatural is not confined to the dark. During daylight hours, tourists have reported seeing shadowy figures lurking in corners, hearing disembodied voices, and feeling sudden cold spots in otherwise warm rooms. One tour guide recounts a particularly eerie experience. As she was closing up for the day, she heard her name whispered in a deep, solemn voice. She looked around only to find herself alone in the corridor. The following day, when she mentioned the incident to her supervisor, he merely nodded and told her that others had experienced similar occurrences. It was as if the spirits within Fort Mifflin had come to recognize the names of the living, welcoming them, or perhaps warning them as they walked the fort's haunted grounds. Fort Mifflin remains a place where the past is as real as the present. Its walls bear the scars of war, its corridors echo with the voices of those long dead, and its grounds are soaked in the memories of sacrifice and suffering. For those who visit, Fort Mifflin is more than a historical site. It's a journey into the supernatural, a place where history and hauntings intertwine, creating an experience that is both terrifying and unforgettable. To this day, paranormal investigators, history buffs, and thrill seekers come to Fort Mifflin, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fort's ghostly inhabitants. Some come with cameras and recording equipment, others with only their curiosity. Many leave with stories of strange occurrences, of unseen presences and voices from beyond. They speak of a place that feels suspended in time, a place where the dead have refused to move on, bound by the tragedies they endured. Fort Mifflin stands as a testament to a past filled with heroism and heartache, a place where spirits linger in shadows, unwilling or unable to be forgotten. For those who dare to walk its haunted corridors, Fort Mifflin offers a glimpse into the unknown, a reminder that sometimes the past refuses to rest. Story 3. The Hauntings of Gettysburg Battlefield. The Battle of Gettysburg, one of the most harrowing chapters in American history, stands as both a turning point in the Civil War and a profound tragedy. Over 3 brutal days in July 1863, more than 50,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or declared missing. The small town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, was forever changed by the bloodshed and devastation it witnessed. Even now, over a century and a half later, the spirits of Gettysburg seem reluctant to leave, with countless reports of ghostly encounters and inexplicable phenomena recorded by visitors, locals, and paranormal investigators alike. Gettysburg is one of the most haunted locations in the United States, its history stained with the sorrow of soldiers lost, battles fought, and lives tragically cut short. The haunting stories are as varied as they are chilling, each one capturing the essence of lives cut down in the prime of youth, of families left behind, and of the battle cries that still echo across the fields. When the cannons fell silent on July 3, 1863, Gettysburg lay devastated. The stench of death filled the air, mingling with the smoke and remnants of gunpowder. The dead were strewn across fields, woods, and hillsides, while the living struggled to process the horrors they had witnessed. Townsfolk were left with the gruesome task of burying thousands of bodies, some laid in shallow graves, others piled into mass pits. In the wake of such carnage, many believed that the souls of those who had fallen in battle never truly departed. The hauntings began almost immediately after the battle ended. Soldiers reported ghostly figures wandering the fields, their bodies still bearing the wounds they had suffered. Some spoke of hearing anguished cries echoing through the night, the sound of spectral footsteps crunching on gravel paths, and occasionally, the whispered names of the fallen. Among the most infamous sites on the battlefield is Devil's Den, a rocky outcropping where some of the bloodiest fighting took place. The boulders and crevices of Devil's Den served as makeshift shelters for soldiers, both Union and Confederate, as they engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat. It was here that countless lives were lost, and the area has since become a hotbed of paranormal activity. Visitors to Devil's Den often describe an overwhelming sense of dread, as if an invisible weight presses upon them. Some report seeing strange, shadowy figures darting between the rocks, while others claim to encounter a spectral figure known as the Lost Soldier. This Confederate apparition, dressed in a tattered uniform, is said to appear confused and disoriented, as if still searching for his regiment amidst the rocks. Many who encounter him describe a profound chill, as though the air itself turns colder in his presence. The soldier often vanishes as suddenly as he appears, leaving an icy silence in his wake. The fear that grips visitors to Devil's Den is palpable. Even those who enter with skepticism often leave with tales of strange encounters, phantom footsteps, sudden drops in temperature, and an eerie feeling of being watched by something unseen. Some visitors have even claimed to find inexplicable anomalies in their photographs, mysterious shadows, ghostly figures, or faint spectral faces peering from behind the rocks. Gettysburg is not only haunted by specters, it is also haunted by sounds, echoes of the violence and chaos that once engulfed it. On quiet days, visitors often report hearing faint sounds of musket fire, the distant rumble of cannons, and, eeriest of all, the cries of soldiers in agony. The sounds are described as though they are drifting through time, a grim echo of the horrors that unfolded on those fields. At night, these ghostly sounds become even more pronounced. Many who camp near the battlefield as part of historical reenactments have reported hearing the unmistakable sounds of marching footsteps in the darkness, despite being completely alone. Others have been jolted awake by the noise of battle, the clash of swords, the boom of artillery, only to find themselves surrounded by nothing but silence. One story, told by a visitor who camped on the battlefield, describes waking to the faint sounds of a bugle call. As he sat up, he could hear footsteps drawing nearer, and the voices of men shouting orders in the distance. When he ventured outside his tent, the noise ceased, and he found himself alone, staring out over an empty, silent field. Perhaps the most haunted area in Gettysburg is the wheat field, a site where more than 6,000 soldiers lost their lives in brutal close-quarter combat. The ground was so soaked with blood that it reportedly took days for the earth to absorb it all. Many who visit the wheat field claim to feel a deep sense of unease, as though the very ground itself bears the weight of the violence inflicted upon it. Some visitors report seeing spectral figures standing guard over the field, their forms shimmering in the early morning mist. Others have witnessed what appear to be full reenactments of battle scenes, with soldiers charging across the field only to vanish into thin air. These ghostly apparitions are described as if frozen in time, forever reliving their last desperate moments. One story tells of a group of tourists who stumbled upon a spectral battle unfolding before their eyes. They watched in stunned silence as soldiers clashed, cannon fire echoed, and the wounded fell to the ground, only to see the entire scene dissipate like smoke. Those who have experienced such encounters often speak of a sense of sorrow, as if they have glimpsed a tragic moment that refuses to fade. General John Reynolds, a Union officer killed on the first day of battle, is one of Gettysburg's most well-known ghostly figures. He fell near the western edge of the battlefield, struck by a Confederate bullet. Since then, many have reported seeing his spirit near the spot where he fell, standing in full uniform, his face etched with sadness. Visitors who encounter General Reynolds often describe feeling an overwhelming sense of loss, as though the general himself is bound to the battlefield, unable to move on. He is frequently seen at dawn or dusk, appearing as a faint figure against the rising or setting sun. Some have even felt a sudden chill in the air, as if touched by a ghostly presence. The sightings of General Reynolds are some of the most poignant on the battlefield, a reminder of the personal sacrifice and the lives left unfulfilled by the ravages of war. Those who see him are left with a lingering sense of sorrow, as though they have witnessed a spirit who is forever tethered to the ground where he made his final stand. Following the Civil War, the National Soldiers' Orphanage was established in Gettysburg to care for the children of soldiers who had died in battle. Yet, despite its noble purpose, the orphanage soon became a place of suffering and abuse. Under the cruel management of its matron, children were reportedly mistreated, locked in the basement as punishment, and subjected to harsh conditions. Thank you for watching today's story. I hope these chilling experiences have made you reflect on fears and trust in life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more engaging stories and interesting content in the future. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.